we'll start. But yeah, just kind of some general notes, and I realize some people will only be watching this in playback. Don't it, For the people who are here live, like it is going to be a lot of information to take in. So please don't worry if it, as I said, if it gets too much and you're overwhelmed and you're just like, no, that's as much as I can take in for right now. Don't worry, like I'm not going to be offended if you leave the thing, and then you can watch the rest kind of in your own time. And same for anyone who's watching this back. You might want to kind of break it as we'll take breaks sort of in the live session, and you might want to kind of let yourself take a break at that point just to process, because there is going to be a lot of kind of theoretical information and technical information in this today. So I'm excited and I'm nervous for this workshop, in all honesty. This is the first time. I've always sort of shied away from teaching this topic because the honest answer is it's really hard to teach this topic. It's not an area where there is a very clear sense of right and wrong a lot of the time, and it's not like just teaching you a tune where by the end of the session you'll have it. Instead, what I hope is that by the end of the session you'll have a lot more understanding of what's needed and about the options open to you, and so that then, but like anything else, it's going to be a practice thing. It's not going to be at the end of this you'll be able to go to any session and play in it. It will hopefully be the start of feeling much more comfortable in the journey. And in the handout, and when I send you all the materials, I've got a whole bunch of other resources and things to help you practice, even though I don't know where, everyone's in different places at the moment, and the situation where you'll be will be different for all of you. Like, it's for some of you, sessions may have restarted. For others, depending on your lockdown situation, that might be a long way off. But there's lots of options for things like virtual sessions at the moment, or other resources to play along with to practice all these skills. So I'll send you a whole bunch of info and resources at the end of this as well, along with the handout. So to get the other thing is, I'm sure that you will have loads of questions as we go along. So if you do, just pop them in the chat, and as we kind of come to natural breakpoints, I'll answer them all and get them in as we go along. So kind of to break down what we're going to do today, we're going to start, first of all, we're just going to start kind of talking about session etiquette and kind of what's expected of you when you go to a session, and as a harpist, what your role will be. Then we're going to get into, there's kind of three fundamentals that you really need to understand to be able to play in a session well. The first is about how to establish the key or the mode that we're in. The second is about how to then choose the chord structure within that mode. And the third is going to be how to choose appropriate accompaniment figures for the time signature that we're in. So we're going to break it down into those three sections, okay? But fundamentally, I mean, jam sessions are one of the best ways that you can improve your skills as a harpist and as a musician. And also, they're a hugely social way just to enjoy having fun with other musicians. So, they're really great gatherings of people sharing tunes and conversations in a very relaxed setting. So, there should not, sometimes you will find a session that is very formal and people take it far too seriously, but for the most part, they should be really nice atmospheres where you will be welcome and where you are, they're a great way to practice things. And if you make a mistake, you know what, it's not the end of the world. It's not a concert. They are a very different thing. And they're also, they're a very important part of passing on the tradition in many parts of the world. In Ireland, in America, and Scotland, many people will learn almost solely at sessions. Like, particularly kids, they'll go along to the pub with their parents and they just sit there and they're listening to the tunes. And as they get better, they can gradually join in one tune and two tunes and three tunes. It's a really important part of kind of passing down the tradition. But, playing in a jam session can be really intimidating for people. And so the first thing to bear in mind is that no two jam sessions will be the same. So the type of jam that you get, say, at the Edinburgh Harp Festival or at any other harp festival is going to be very different from the type of jam session that you might get in an Irish bar, which is going to be very different to the type of jam session you'll get in a Scottish pub, which is very different to the type of jam session you'll get in somebody's house. You know, they can be in all these different settings. And so a variety of factors can influence the character of the particular jam that you're going to. And that, you know, it can be the time it happens at, the place, the style, whether there's people listening or not. So again, it might be a little, if this is something that you're interested in doing more of, it might be a little bit of trial and error of finding the local jam sessions in your area, or finding some friends that you think you might want to jam with, and just trying them out and seeing which one sort of fits right for you. Because, you know, you might go to one and discover it's not really the right fit. Back to that thing, like, they are social and they should be fun. So if the people that you're playing with aren't very fun, then try another one and you'll probably find that. The other important thing to note, that, like, today we're going to be specifically talking about Celtic jams, but, you know, the things that we'll learn here can be applicable to lots of other styles. But with a Celtic session, the focus is on the instrumental songs or tunes, or sometimes songs, found within the Celtic tradition. So we're talking about jigs, reels, hornpipes, polkas, slip jigs, things like that. Rarely do you get slow airs in sessions, although you might get kind of slower tunes like waltzes or things like some O'Carolan tunes. You might definitely get some of them. But the important thing is that in all of these, the tune is the most important thing. And so one thing that's really not okay in a session is to sort of improvise or jam over tunes. People will generally get really annoyed if you do that. So either you want to be stick to playing the tune, or you want to be playing chords, but you don't want to be kind of soloing over the top of that. That's like the surefire way to get everybody's back up at the session. And related to that is, like, not to noodle away on your heart. Like, either do something that's fitting what's going on, or sit back and listen, but try and not sort of be the person who's sitting in the corner just playing random stuff that's not fitting. And then just in terms of how a session works, like, again, they can be really different. So in some sessions, you will have one experienced musician who's sort of leading the session, and they'll be the person that's generally in charge of starting the sets of tunes. Very often they will call out the keys or the names of the tunes as they go through, and they'll be responsible for kind of keeping the whole thing flowing. So that's one kind of very common setup. Sometimes they're much more open, and so they don't have a formal leader, and it might operate either by people kind of going round in a circle and taking turns to start a set of tunes, or it might just be that it's a little bit more free flowing and people start them in random. With that, if it's that way, if it's the first way, in a way it's fine, because you're not in control and you don't have to make any decisions, so that makes life easier. But if it's the second way, there's a couple of kind of little points of guidance. First of all, that especially if it's more of a free-flowing one, not one where it's going round, you don't want to have one person sort of dominating the session. So try and not always be the person that starts tunes, unless you are the session leader. Give everybody a chance. And second of all, the most important thing is to make sure that you choose and you start sets that people will know. Okay, a session is not a chance to play a solo. It's about a chance to play a tune that everybody is going to be able to join in with. So choose the most common tunes that you know, that you think will be kind of communally shared with everybody. So that's kind of a really just important part about the etiquette. Like, you're generally musically following whoever has started the tune, and if it's you who started it, make sure it's something that everybody else can follow. It's not your chance to show off your Deborah Henson Conant New Blues. Like, this is about playing tunes that will be common repertoire, okay? And then kind of with the actual structure of how it will work. Typically, in a session, you'll find that tunes are arranged into sets. So sets of multiple tune types of similar, so you have like maybe 3 reels or 2 jigs, or so generally kind of 2 to 4 tunes is about the normal amount. And as you go to, sometimes the leader or the person who started the set will tell you what the keys are going to be. Sometimes not. Sometimes they'll tell you what the tunes are going to be, sometimes not. Again, it sort of depends on the level of the session that you go to, and what they expect of you. But with all of it, like, the most important part is always going to be listening. So within that, every session kind of might have some unwritten house rules or whatever like that, or guidelines about how they run. But there are some general rules of thumb to keep in mind, and these are, I can't stress these enough. So the first one is, if you don't know the tune, sit it out and listen. Okay, so I let the tune go round at least twice before you start to try and join in, so that you know what's going on and you know what to expect. That you don't want to kind of think, oh, okay, I've never heard this tune before, but it seems like it's in G major, I can vamp along, and then suddenly find that the B part goes somewhere totally different. And so now you're suddenly clashing with the chords. So at least once round, ideally twice, just to start getting familiarity with the tune. And like I said before, don't noodle. Like, if you don't know the tune, don't sit there and just sort of play random stuff trying to fit in. Don't improvise, listen and absorb. And then once you feel confident, then you can start to join in a way that's going to be much more beneficial to everybody else, okay? Second bit of etiquette is, don't be afraid to ask the name of the tune. If they've played a tune and you really like it, by all means, ask for the name, write it down, and then you can go away and learn it. Then third, if you are going to, it's very useful to record the session and the tunes that are played in a session. But I would always ask for permission before you do that. So don't just go and plonk your phone down in the middle of the table and expect everybody to be okay with it. Again, these are all, they're all common sense. They're all just about simple manners, but a lot of the time, I think because people are sort of outside of their comfort zone, sometimes they can behave a bit erratically, but it's a really quick way to annoy everybody else. So again, it's just worth knowing them. And then fourth, if you're trying to figure out, if it's a tune that you don't know and you're trying to figure out the key or the chords, then do it quietly. Like, it's really important that you're not disturbing the flow of the music all the time. So anything where you're not really sure of what you're doing, play it quietly. And a great tip with that is, like, if you put your ear to the top of your harp or the sound box of your harp, like, you can hear it so much more clearly. One of the things that's very difficult in the session is that you often can't hear yourself clearly. But yeah, if you press your ear, a lot of times in session, I'll play like that, because it acts like a microphone. It's right up against your ear, and you can hear yourself so much more clearly. So when you're trying to figure out what's going on, then it lets you play at kind of half the volume, but to be able to hear it very clearly for yourself. So, then on to kind of what to do in the session. So whether you're going to play the tune or the chords. So if you know the tune that's being played, or you've started the set, another thing is, if you start the set yourself, make sure you're really confident with the tune that you've chosen, because you really don't want to peter out halfway through and discover actually you don't really know. You don't want to like bank on the fact that everyone else will know it and then discover you really don't. Be very confident in the ones you choose. But yeah, if you know the tune being played, or if you've started the set by yourself, then by all means play the melody. And the good thing about this is, if you start going to a session regularly, most sessions you'll find have a sort of fairly solid bank of common tunes that will come up most weeks. So as you go to the session more regularly, you'll start to recognize those more and more easily. And so each week it will end up getting easier and easier. One of the hardest things is going to a session for the very first time, because probably a lot of the tunes will be new to you. There are kind of common session tunes that probably you will find in every session in the world, but that's maybe only 10%. But then within that, away from that, there's probably another 40% of tunes that are specific to each session and will be played most weeks. Because again, it's back to that thing of knowing what everybody knows. People like to play the things that they know everyone knows. So it sort of evolved. This is why it's like a community, because you get this little bank of common repertoire that will come up again and again. So, as I say, every week it will get easier, and you can ask people the name of the tune, or if you've got permission, then you can record it, and then that allows you to go home and listen to it a lot, so that you're ready for the next week. So I think it's, if you can get permission, and people will never say no if you ask, they'll always say it's fine to record it, but it's really useful. So I've got lots and lots of tapes of sessions, and I'll just put them on and I'll listen to them when I'm driving, and I'll listen to them when I'm doing the washing up, or any of these times, because it's about this familiarity with the tunes. The more you have heard a tune, the more it will get into your head. And then in the next session, instead of it being something that's unfamiliar, it now starts to sound a little bit familiar, and gradually you're sort of progressing with it. So it's so much easier to play a tune or to work out the chords for a tune that you are already familiar with than something that's completely new. And if this whole learning by ear etiquette thing is very new to you, the blog post that I did, I think 2 weeks ago, is all about tips and tricks for learning by ear. And again, with that, like, the biggest thing is choose tunes that you already know. And so it's kind of the same with this. Like, you want to just gradually get to know the tunes in a session so that you can play along with them. And at the start, like, you really might not know any of them the first time you go, and that's fine. Even if you take your harp along and you only end up playing for 2 tunes, that is so much better. So much better to play 2 tunes that you know really well and in a way that's really respectful to the other musicians, than to join in with 20 tunes in a way that's just really a bit of a mess, and then everyone's thinking like, oh God, I really hope she doesn't come back next week. So it's not rude in any way to just sit back and listen. Like, listening is as much a part of being in a session as playing, okay? And it's actually like a sign of great respect if you're listening and processing rather than just jumping in with something if you don't know it, okay? So yeah, if you know the tune, or if you start the set, or if you're able to have gone back and learnt it, the next week, by all means, play the tune. However, often, especially in advanced sessions, you might find that the melody is played very, very fast. So there's some ways around that. I mean, you can learn to play very, very fast yourself. That might be an option. That's great if it is. I mean, that's kind of the dream situation, where you can play, where you know all of the melodies and you're able to play all of them up to the speed. In order to get to that stage, it's just a matter of, again, going to the sessions all the time and then doing your homework in between each one. Like, set yourself a goal of learning, say, 2 of the tunes, and gradually, like, your rank will go up and up. But if the melody is very fast and it's not possible to keep up with it, very often, like, if it's lots of fiddles in the session, they're just playing at a speed that's really unrealistic for harpists. Or if the melody isn't familiar to you, then what I would revert to is, I would just not play the melody at all, and I would revert to playing instead the chords. And that's what we're mostly going to focus on today. So, if playing just the melodies is your main goal at the end of this, then I would just recommend get a book of session tunes and start learning them off by heart, and go to a session and start learning the tunes. But today, what I want to focus on much more is that idea of being able to vamp along with anything, and how you go about doing that. Because if you're at a session, the chances are that there are already lots of other melody players there. So you don't really need to. The harp's really quiet as well. Like, it's very hard to be heard in a big session. So then again, like, playing the chords and being the accompanist is going to be way more valuable. So the fastest way really to ingratiate yourself to other players at a jam session is to keep great rhythm. If you can have great rhythm, then people will love playing with you. So rhythm playing is really is a very essential harp skill to master, and a steady, accurate rhythm will help fuel the song and anchor the groove of the tune. So it's really, it's such a vital skill to develop. And when you're playing rhythm, the most important thing is to keep the tempo steady. So do not be the person in the session that drags or that really pushes the speed. Try and get rock steady with what you're doing. Metronome practice is very useful for that. So you're just trying to really lock it in. So I guess my kind of rhythm tips are that you want to focus on the groove, not the accent of the tune. So you're really thinking about just where are the main beats, and you want to stay on tempo. So we're going to come back to a lot more rhythm stuff after. But yeah, as I said before, there's kind of 3 main things that you need to know before you can start jamming along with people. So you have to identify 3 things. You have to identify the key that they're in, or the mode. I'm going to use the word mode rather than key. You need to know the time signature or the tune type that's being played, so you know what type of accompaniment shapes to be playing. And then you need to know the chord structure and which chords go where. So we're going to discuss each of those in turn. So The first and biggest challenge really is finding the key of the piece, okay? So the first thing you need to know before you can find out what any of the chords are is what the key is going to be, and then also to really be confident with which levers that means that you have to set on for your harp. We have a double challenge here on the harp. It's much easier if you're a piano player in a session, because when people suddenly change key, they're fine, but on the harp, you have to do all these levers. So the first thing really that you want to do is try and identify the key note of the tune, okay? So very often this will be the first and last note of the tune. You can think of it as like the home pitch, okay? So unless you have perfect pitch, this might take a little bit of fiddling around with. So if I was in a tune, if I was in a session, sorry, and somebody was playing this tune. Okay, it's probably a tune that many of you know anyway, but this G is the note that is the first note. And then it comes again at the halfway point. And again, it's your end note. So what I would do is when I'm trying to figure out this is, again, as the tune is playing, I would just start, I would do exactly what I said at the start. I would put my ear against the harp and I would sort of be trying all the other notes of the scale against it to try and pick out what's the right one. So if I play that around and you just put your, well, you don't need to put your ear to it just now because you're on your own in your house, but if you try playing all the other notes kind of around it, hopefully you'll start to feel that G is the right one. Okay, so let's just have a go at that. So. That doesn't sound wrong, like when it's in, if you play that on the first and the last beat. So if I was kind of doing it, then now pretend I'm not playing the tune, somebody else is, but what I would do is then kind of start playing it on sort of maybe every fourth main beat. So if you sort of play it on those first beats and the last beats, it's pretty apparent that it fits. Whereas if I played something else, like if I played the C or B, let's see. It's not right, it's clashing somehow, okay? So you're just trying to like identify what that keynote is. So let's just do a little practice of it. I'm going to play a couple of tunes for you in various different keys, try and not cheat by looking at my levers. And yeah, then try and figure out what you think the keynote is. And yeah, we'll do it just kind of one at a time. So let's do a few. So we're going to be in jig time. So it'd be 1 and 2 and 2. Pop in the chat, what key do you think that was? Or just what was the keynote of that? And don't worry if you get it.
E minor.
Yeah, don't worry about major or minor right now. I just want to say keynote. Yeah, perfect. Lots of E's there, great. So E is exactly right. Good, let's try another one. Okay. Okay, so how about that one? Yeah, pop in the chat.
A.
Yeah, good. A, yeah, lots of A's there. Great. Okay, let's think of one more. Okay. Now, the good news is that especially if there's other instruments in sessions, generally your keys are going to be something around a G, a D, or an A. So I would, if you have your levers all down, so you're in a flat key like E flat or A flat, you're going to give yourself a much harder time. So when I go to a session, I would always keep my harp probably in D major as my starting point, because then if my harp's in D, then the D, the G, the A, the B are all naturals. So I'm much more likely to find the key note. Whereas if your flats are on, you give yourself a way harder time because you're going to have to start flipping levers to find it. Very occasionally you might get a flat, like you might get F major or something like that, but it's very rare. And I would certainly go through all of the naturals before I add anything else. And like you're almost never going to get something like C sharp as your keynote, or G flat or A flat. Like they're just not session friendly keys. Remember, again, sessions are about playing together for many abilities. So it's you're not going to get weird keys coming up. Okay. So yeah, once you've identified what the keynote is, we have to work out what mode we're in, and this will tell us what levers to set. And so this is probably going to be the most complicated part of today, just understanding this little bit about modes if this is new to you. And this is why I didn't want you to write in major or minor, because the sort of annoying thing in some ways about Celtic music is that a lot of the time it's not really about major or minor, it's about the modes. Okay, now what I mean by the modes is basically Celtic music is always going to be written in one of 4 modes. So it's not as simple as major or minor. But what I mean by modes is, what I want you to just set your harp into, let's go into C major, okay? And I'm going to just share my screen with you for a second. So the modes are another word for the types of scales you get when you start on different scale degrees. Okay, so when we are in C major and we play from a C to a C on our harps like this, that's what we would all commonly call a major scale. Yep. That's also the proper term for that is an Ionian mode. Okay, so Ionian mode, and that is the most common mode for Celtic music, which is good news. So just our major scale, Ionian mode, that's sort of our home ground. But then what happens is, if we play a scale that's starting from another note, that's when we start to go through these different modes. Okay, and these are all like, it goes back to like ancient Greek times, that how these modes work. So the next mode, if you play a scale again but starting on D, so it's going to sound like this. Okay, so it's sort of like a minor scale, but if we wanted our harmonic minor, we'd have to have that raised, and we don't have that, so it's this. Okay, so that's what we call the Dorian mode. That's our second mode as we go through. And then as you go up again, then you would start the next scale from the E. That one's pretty weird sounding. That's known as the Phrygian mode. From F is the Lydian mode. From G, G sharp, that's our Mixolydian mode, and that's a very key one in Celtic music. And from A is our Aeolian mode. Again, that one's used a lot in Celtic music. And from B would be Locrian mode. Again, we never really use that. So the ones that we need to worry about are these 4. So Ionian. Oops, no, I can't highlight them. That's annoying. There we go. So Ionian mode, this one from C to C, the Dorian mode, the Mixolydian mode, and the Aeolian mode. Okay, and that's all of Celtic music will be in one of those 4 modes. Okay, you're not gonna have anything else, which is kind of the first bit of good news. But it's really important to start to recognize which mode we're in, because they will have different lever settings, okay? So if you, the first thing we want to do is to be able to start recognizing them by the character that they have, okay? So the first easy way to distinguish these four from each other is that your Ionian mode, and then I should just screen share that again because it's useful to have up. Too many things. Here we go. Okay, so your Ionian mode, so this one, and your Mixolydian mode are your major modes, okay? So they are the ones that are going to sound happy for the most part. So if I play the C one, Ionian, sounding happy. And then let's play the Mixolydian one. So that's the one that starts on G. Now this one mostly sounds happy except for our top note. So, okay, so it's like a happy scale, but it has that slightly strange top half to it. And then our two minor modes are the Dorian mode, so this one, and the Aeolian mode. So that's just useful to know, because when we're listening to a tune and when we're trying to work out, once we've got our keynote, when we're trying to work out which mode that relates to, we can straight away go from 4 options down to 2 by deducing whether it's major sounding or minor sounding, okay? So it's important to practice, recognizing the mode of a tune. And so that first thing about whether they are major or minor is kind of the most important. So again, Ionian, standard major scale, Mixolydian, major scale, this flat 7th. And then the Dorian and Aeolian are both minor scales, but the Dorian sounds a bit more optimistic and the Aeolian sounds a bit more pessimistic, okay? So we'll come back to those, but it's important to practice listening for the differences between these modes and starting to recognize them. And so it's just useful to know the characteristics of them. So I've kind of put them in the table, which I think is how I would describe their characters. And all of this will be on the handout, so don't worry about having to copy it. So Ionian mode is your mode number 1. It's not different at all from your major scale, and it feels happy and bright. And that's our most common major type, okay? Then Dorian, so that's the one that starts on scale 2. What's different about this one from the major scale is that it's got a lowered third, so it has a minor third in there, and it's got a lowered 7th, okay? So it has a minor feel overall, but then you have this slightly strange top half to it, okay? And this is going to be your most common minor type. So that's always if it sounds minor, that's always the one I would kind of try first. And with both of these, if something sounds major, try the Ionian first. If it sounds minor, try the Dorian first. And if then it's not fitting, then you can try the other 2. So your Mixolydian is this one with it's major sounding, but it's got this flat 7th. Okay. And so that's a major one, but it's less common than the Ionian. And then you've got Aeolian, which is very dark and miserable sounding. So that sounds more like your true minor, and that's going to be your rarest in terms of the chords, okay? So the important thing about understanding this is that once we know which mode we're in, we can also work out the key signature and therefore which levers we need. And then that also works in reverse. So if you see a tune written out and you can see the key note, then you can work out which mode it's in. So this is a very, this little table here is really useful. Okay, so to understand it with what we've just been doing with C. So if we're in a key with 0 flats, so C flats are 0 sharps, so C major, then we know that the Ionian will be C. Our Mixolydian would start on G. Our Dorian would start on D and our Aeolian would start on A. So you would have the same levers for all of those 4 keys, okay? The only thing that would be changing between them is what your home note is, okay? So if you see a tune that's got no sharps or no flats at the start of it, and it's starting and ending on C, then you can probably say, okay, this is in the Ionian mode. But if you see a tune where it's got no sharps and no flats, but the key note seems to be G, then you know that you're probably in the Mixolydian mode, okay? And so on. If you have no sharps, no flats, but it seems to be based around D, so that one there is a good example. You all identified correctly that the key note there was D, but when I play it, there's no sharps and no flats then. So we know that the key signature there is D Dorian instead. And then equally, if it no sharps, no flats, but your keynote was A, then you know that you're in Aeolian mode, okay? So I know that this is a lot to take in, and you may have to watch and rewatch this little part of the video again and again to start understanding it. But hopefully once you do, that will make a big difference. So first of all, this chart helps you. It helps you in both directions. So if you are seeing a piece of music and you can see it has 2 sharps, then you can work out what the keynote is, and then you know which of these modes you're in. And then also vice versa. If you know that if you've identified that, for instance, you are playing in D and it's a Mixolydian mode, then you can reverse engineer it to know how many sharps you're going to need on your harp, okay? So this is just, I would print out this little table and just stick it to the front of your folder. It's very useful. And you can see that also the relationship between these, this is really interesting. So if we think about, for instance, A major, as we call it, A Ionian, it has 3 sharps in the key signature, okay? Then when we go to A Mixolydian, we're down to just 2 sharps. So what's happened is one of your sharps has become a natural now. Then again, when we go over to Dorian, now you're just down to 1 sharp. So again, it's now 2 of your sharps have been naturalized. And if you went to A Aeolian, now you're into a place with no sharps, okay? So again, seeing all of these, you can see like they all go on these diagonals. So you could start to understand better how these different things relate to each other, okay? So what you would do for any of these, say like what we just did at the start, you would identify what the keynote is, and then from there, so let's say if we were looking at that, let's look at the one that was Morrison's jig. Okay, that's the first part of that tune. So you all correctly identified before that the keynote of that was the note E, okay? But then with only knowing it's E, our next question that we want to ask ourselves is then, okay, does this tune sound major or minor? Okay, so hopefully you would all agree that that sounds pretty minor in feel. So then we know, so now we know we've got our home note is an E, and now we know it's a minor. So then we can take away these 2 because those are the majors. So now we know it's probably going to be Dorian or Aeolian. So straight away, we know that we're either going to want to have 2 sharps on or 1 sharp on. So then this will, as you get better at this, your ear will tune into it. But for now, you could just try putting on 2 sharps and see if that sounds right. And if it doesn't, then you take 1 off. But you're in a much better position than where if you'd started from your 4 sharps, okay? So you've gone down to a process of elimination of just 2 possible key signatures, if that makes sense. Okay, and you can see that this tune, if I played it, when it gets to this point in the tune, it has a C sharp on, okay? So then we know that this is the one that has 2 sharps in the key signature, so we can identify that as being an E Dorian tune, okay? So that's how this little bit works, and it takes a little bit of time to get used to. But let's do a little bit of let's do a pop quiz. I want to try and leave this up, and then also share some other stuff with you. How do we do that? Can I share two things at a time? One sec. I'm going to stop the share first, and then. So, if, for instance, we took, I'm going to just use as an example, I'm going to use the Edinburgh Heart Festival. Oh, maybe I can do it advanced. Can I do two at a time? No, that's really annoying. Anyway, that's fine. Okay, let's take the Edinburgh Heart Festival tune book. Okay, so let's just look at this very first tune in here. So, first thing to do, obviously this is kind of giving away the game a little bit because the notes are written in, but we would first of all look at identifying what the key note of this tune is. Okay, so here our tune, it starts on a D, it ends on a D again. It doesn't start on a D there, but again it ends on a D. So we could probably, if I played it for you, hopefully you would all be comfortable saying, yeah, the key note here is D. Now, because here we can see the key signature, we can see that this has two sharps. So if we go back to our other little chart, this one, then we can see that our key note is D, so it's going to be one of these four, and we have two sharps on, so it's this one here. So we know that we're in the Ionian mode. Now, if you were reverse engineering this, and if you didn't have the sheet music, what you could have done is you could have said, well, okay, I know it's in, I know the key note is D, and secondly, I know that it sounds like it's in a major key. It sounds major. So it's going to be then either your Ionian or your Mixolydian. So then again, I would always start from the Ionian, set two sharps on, and if that didn't fit, then you would take one off. Okay, so you kind of got this way of engineering it and then reverse engineering it. So let's try another one. Let's look at a more difficult one. Yeah, this is a good one. Okay. So look at this tune. Oh, am I sharing with you? No. Okay, so this tune that's on the screen here, I'll play it for you. It's going to go like this. So hopefully again, either by listening or and kind of playing along with it, or just by looking, you could see that it doesn't start on a D this time. So given our first note, we might be thinking, oh, maybe the key note here might be A. But then as we go along, the end of each line there, that's a D, and most importantly, our kind of end note of the part is a D. So we could identify that our key note here was probably going to be D. But straight away, this tells you that this tune is modal, because if we think about it, sounds major. Yeah. But we know that in D true major, D Ionian, we would normally have two sharps in the key signature. But here there's only one sharp in the key signature. Then again, we can look back to our little chart, and we can see that that probably means, so our key note is D, but we only have one sharp. So that means that we're in this mode of D Mixolydian. Okay, so the more you do this, the more you will hopefully get used to it. And and it will become not such a big deal. Really, all you're having to worry about is, does it sound major or minor? And then there's a choice of 2 key signatures and therefore 2 types of levers that you could be having to put on. So it's just helping you identify which key you need to be getting your harp into, okay? Let's see. Chris is asking, do you ever need to know the E flat modes? I didn't see them on the chart. So no, again, like, I mean, never say never, but what we're talking about here mostly is like your common sessions with other people, and generally like a whistle can't play an E flat unless they have an E flat whistle. An accordion is not going to want to play an E flat. A fiddle is certainly not going to want to play an E flat. So no, for the most part, we are going to be, if you go through again that session book, almost every tune that you see will be in a key that has sharps rather than flats in it. So I would definitely focus on your sharp keys, first of all. And yeah, as I said, Sheila's just asking, I would always start in a session with my harp set in D major, because it's in the middle of those. If my harp set in D, that's got 2 sharps on, so it's halfway between the 1 sharp option and the 3 sharp option. So it's going to be a really good starting point, which means I'm not having to like constantly change the levers up and down. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Does anyone else? I know this modes thing is a little bit weird and it takes a little bit of time to get used to. So did anyone have any other questions about understanding those modes for now? What we're going to do now is we're going to go through each one in turn and spend a lot more time with it, kind of recognizing the characters of it and getting comfortable with them. Yeah, tunes that change mode halfway through, how to cope with levers. So hopefully, if you had a situation like that, again, back to our little chart, hopefully in that situation, you would be changing from like a related mode to a related mode. Like you might have your first part might be in G, and then your second part might be in D mixolydian, but they're both in the same key signature. So hopefully that's going to be the case. Sometimes you will get a situation where you have to change levers halfway through, but it's pretty rare. Like I would say that's less than 5% of the session tunes that will come up. I would say probably maybe less than 10% will change modes anymore from just major to minor, and very unlikely that you're going to have to touch your levers. And even if you did, there's always a way around it, which again, we'll talk about later. Claire, you understand the modes. Good, I'm glad. And again, like all of this is written in this handout. Okay, so you will get all, you can read it over and over and over. And please, if you get, you know, if we're 3 weeks later and you're reading it and you're just like, I do not understand what she is saying here, just get in touch with me. Okay, I'm absolutely happy to jump on a Zoom and try and explain this more, or over email or anything. Sheila is asking, do I tune any flats? I don't quite know what you mean. Okay, so I think this is what you mean, and if it's not, then just correct me. So my harp is always set. If my levers are all down, my harp is always in E flat. Okay, so I have the possibility for flats there. It's just that I will set it up. So yeah, so I'm not tuning my harp in D, I'm setting the levers for D. That's a much more central. So by doing that, I know I have the possibility to get from anything from 3 flats up to 4 sharps. And that's why I think that E flat is a more useful tuning for your harp than A flat if you're playing with other people, because E major does come up, whereas A flat, like, I don't think I've ever been in a session where it's an A flat session. But yeah, so you've kind of got all the other possibilities, but by having it just in D, it just means I'm not having to start from, like, if I am in E flat and they play a tune in D, I'm immediately going to have to change like 5 times, like 25 levers. Whereas if I start in a sharp key, I'm much more likely to be close to that. So yeah, so I would, that's the way I would do it. And related to that, this is just a total aside, but you know, I was talking at the start about like the relative friendliness of sessions and things like that. So sometimes in really like elite sessions in Ireland, they will have what they call like an E flat session. And this is essentially like a really pretentious thing where they do it to stop other people. Most likely, you know, a normal wooden flute or most people on fiddle will not be able to play in those flat keys. So it's kind of a way of being really exclusive and making sure that nobody else does come and join in their session. So it's kind of like, if you ever find yourself in an E flat session, probably it's with people you really don't want to be with, unless they're harp players, in which case it's way more understandable. But yeah, that's just, if you ever do find yourself in a session that's all E flat, that's why, because some people just do that to be exclusive. Good, okay. So now we've kind of gone through those modes. And yeah, our next part, we're going to just focus in on each of these modes a little bit. So we're going to start with the Ionian mode, okay? So this is this one that sounds like your major scale. It's the one that should be hopefully really comfortable for everybody. So I want you to put your harp into G major. Okay, so F sharp on. So Ionian mode means that we're starting on the keynote. So we're in G major, that means our scale is going from G. Oh, sorry, I'm not in G. Now I am. Okay, so it's sounding happy. Our keynote is G. We're comfortably in the Ionian mode, okay? So, as I said before, the Ionian mode is by far the most common that you're gonna get in all music, actually, not just Celtic music. So it's that major key tunes which sound happy, nothing else going on in the key signature. So some common Ionian tunes, and again, I've given you kind of a couple of these in the handout and we'll go through them, are tunes like Mrs. MacLeod of Rassay, Spruta Scary, Out on the Ocean, Willie Coleman's. I mean, I could make you a list of 100 of these tunes that are all in major. And as I said before, within the Ionian mode, the most common keys that you'll find in a session would be your G, your D, or your A. So if your tune is sounding happy and you're trying to identify the keynote, those are always the first 3 notes I would try when you're trying to fit it in, okay? So once we know the keynote and we've set our levers on, then we can start trying to figure out what the chord progression is, okay? So this is where hopefully you guys will understand what I mean by all of this, and I can go back over it if not. If you've done my arranging course, we went through this in a lot of detail. But so at the moment we're in the key of G major, okay? So each scale degree, and by that I just mean each note of the scale, gets given a number. Okay, so G is number 1, A is 2, B is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then back to 1. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. And then those also relate to our chord numbers, okay? So it's really useful with all of this if you can start thinking in numbers rather than letters, because that lets you interchange between the keys much more easily than if you're always thinking about the key. Okay, so we're just going to start with some work on that. So if we think about our chords, that's now just going to be the triad shape. Okay, so for our chord number 1 in G major is going to be the triad that has G at the bottom of it. Okay, so our bottom note is a G, so a G triad. Okay, so just find that. So then chord 2 would be A triad, chord 3, B triad, chord 4, chord 5, chord 6, chord 7, and then back to chord 1. Okay, so all I want us to do right now is in Ionian tunes, the most common chords that we're going to use are chords 1, chord 4, and chord 5. Okay, so I just want us to get really used to finding these and getting confident with moving around with them. So for now, like, I would probably just stick to one hand. You don't to make anything difficult for yourself with playing, but if you want to use 2 hands, that's fine. So I'm just going to say a chord name and I want you to play it. Okay, so starting on chord 1. Now find chord 4. So just count up. Your chord 4 should be the one on C. Okay, find chord 5. Back to chord 1. to chord 5, back to chord 1, to chord 4, chord 1, 4, 5, 6, back to 4, 5, 1, 3, 4, 6, 5, 1. Okay, so that's a really useful exercise to do to start yourself thinking about these numbers. So again, with this video, you can just go back and loop that little bit. Now, we don't want to get stuck in thinking about notes. We want to think about numbers. So straight away, we're going to confuse your brain. I want you to put yourself into D major. So add on your C levers. And now we're going to do exactly the same. But remember that now your chord 1 is D. And E, F, G. Okay, so find chord 1 in D major. Chord 4. Chord 5. Chord 1. 4. 5. 1. 6. 4. 5. 6. 4. 1. 4. 5. 1. Yeah, great, good, okay. And then let's put ourselves into A major now. So add on your G levers. Good, okay, and exactly the same thing. So now chord 1 is A, and you're counting up from there. So chord 1, chord 4, chord 5, back to 4, chord 1, chord 3, chord 4, chord 6, chord 5, chord 1. Yeah, good. So this is a really, if this is something that you're not very comfortable with, then I would definitely spend quite a bit of time just practicing that to get your brain really used to thinking about the numbers. And to practice, you can just get like a piece of paper and just literally write a series of numbers from 1 to 7. So if you go 1, 4, 5, 3, 2, 6, 7. So, you might write that out for yourself. And I don't know if that appears backwards for you, does it? No, that's okay. So you could try, so let's do that. So try playing that series of chords now. Good, okay, now put your harp into D major. So take off your Gs. And we're going to play exactly the same sequence, but now your chord 1 is D, and you're counting up from there. Good. So don't worry if you didn't have time for that, but so it's just a good, if that's not something, a lot of people, especially if you've only been learning from sheet music, you really might not be used to using those chord numbers, but it's so useful. It's useful for this, it's useful for learning how to arrange, it's useful for just understanding your theory. So it's a really good thing. So The reason I want to start with that is because for all of these different modes, we're going to be talking about chord numbers mostly. And then is the beauty about that is then it makes it the same thing no matter what key we're in. So if we're in D Ionian and I say the chord progression is 1, 4, 5, that's fine, you remember that. But if we go to G Ionian, it could also be 1, 4, 5. And you're not having to be like, okay, well in D it was D, G, A, and in G it's G, C, D. You know, you just have one set of chords and it makes life a lot easier. So for Ionian tunes, the good news is that there's really only 3 main chords that we're going to use. We're going to use chord 1, we're going to use chord 4, and we're going to use chord 5. Okay, at the end, before everyone be like, but what about chord 6 and 3? There are substitutions that are possible, but right now, all we want to focus on is like the bare bones, okay, the basics. So we know that for Ionian tunes, we have chords 1, 4, and 5. So it might help you to write, or again, you don't need to write it out because it'll have this when I send it to you. But for instance, so this is in each key. In G major, chord 1 would be G, chord 4 would be C, and chord 5 is D. In D major, chord 1 is D, G, A, and in A major, A, D, E. Okay, so it's just, that's just going to be there in the handout to give you a wee reminder. So it's all very well knowing that what the chords are going to be, but now we've got to think about what order they're going to be in. So, sorry, now we've moved around so much. Let's go back to G major, okay? So what we've basically got to do is, knowing that we've got 3 chords, we've got to figure out where they go. So this is easier than it seems, because in most Celtic tunes, or in the majority of Celtic tunes, again, there are exceptions that we'll talk about separately, in each bar, your foot is going to tap twice. So there's kind of 2 main beats per bar, okay? So that means that for the average person, like, you know, the quickest really that a harp player would want to change chords is going to be like once on each of those beats. So let's assume there's 2 potential chords per bar, okay? Now, the other thing is that you know that in Celtic music, most of the time we're working with 8-bar phrases. So what I would do is I would draw out something that just looks like that to start off with. Okay, so this would be bar 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's put a little double bar line at the end of there. And in each of those, we have 2 possible chord slots. Just like that, okay? So you've got 8 bars, you've got 16 possible chord slots. Now, what you're doing basically when you're picking chords is you're trying to listen to the notes that are falling on the dominant beats of the melody. So that are kind of coming on the first beat of the bar and then that second dominant beat of the bar, okay? So there's a couple of little cheats. What you're trying to do is you're trying to make, right now, all we want to do is make a kind of very simple framework for what those chords are going to be. But the good news is that again, there's a couple of kind of little tricks and cheats that will work, not all the time, but probably 85% of the time, okay? So make yourself a little chart that looks like this, first of all, okay? So you've got 8 bars and 2 chord placements in each. So the first trick is that almost all the time, chord 1 is going to go pretty much at the start and at the end of each section. Okay, so you can write a 1 into your first chord slot and a 1 into your very last chord slot. Okay, so like that. And also, a lot of the time, you also get chord 1 at the start of bar 4. So I would probably start with that as my format. So 1, and it goes along, and then 1, and it goes along, okay? So for 90, or I don't know the exact stats, but let's say for 85% of the tunes you play, that's where your chord 1 is going to go. Then, normally our sections, and again, you know, let's say 85% of the time, your sections will end with it going chord 5, then 1. So your second last slot there will become chord 5. Okay, that's again very common. And similarly, our last beat of line 1 is very often a chord 5. Okay, so now in line 1, we're starting with chord 1, and our last beat is going to be chord 5. And we're starting with chord 1, and then in our last bar, we've got 5, 1. Okay. So that gives us like an initial framework. And then what we're trying to, it's like doing a jigsaw puzzle. Then you're starting to fill in where the gaps are. But again, there's some very common patterns that you get. So very often, you will get chord 4 coming right before the chord 5 here. Okay, so 1, 4, 5. And similarly, very often we get chord 4 in bar 7, on the first beat of bar 7, and it lasts for that whole bar. Okay, so put it in there. I'm just going to write this out, not in Roman numerals, because that might also be easier for some people. 1, 4, 5, and there it is below in non-Roman numerals, just in case that helps you. So what we're going to do, hopefully you've got a copy of that, we're just going to try playing that chord progression. And all I want you to do for now is think, we'll go into all about the filling out the rhythms and everything like that later. All I want you to do now is play a triad, okay? And just where it comes in, okay? So if our beats, our taps are going to go 1, 2, 1, 2, and that relates to the notes on your page, okay, then what we're going to end up is with, okay, so ready, 1, 2, 3, 4, chord 1, tap, 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 then 4, 5, back to 1, tap, 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 then chord 4 for 2, tap, tap, then 5, 1. Okay, so let's try and do that without, I'll take it a little bit slower, but we'll keep totally in the rhythm. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, tap, 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 tap. 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, 2, 5, 1. Okay, so this is like a very typical chord progression that we get, and you can fill in some of the other blanks if you don't want to like have all this blank space in there. Then just fill in the chord that you've had previously all the way along. So we would put in, I'm not going to bother worrying about the double beats, but so now it become 1, 1, 1, 4, 5, 1, 1, 4, 5, 1. Okay, so let's try playing it like that. I'll hold it up as we play it. Okay, so 1 and 2 and 1, tap, 1, tap, 1, tap, 4, 5, 1, tap, 1, tap, 4 and 5, 1. Okay, so very common progression. So I want to show you that and how that fits with a whole bunch of tunes. That same progression working with loads of them. So we're going to start off, you don't need to worry about the tune, but we're going to be playing the tune Spooty Scary, which is a very common Scottish session tune, which goes like this. Okay, so our main beats are going like this. beats are, they're all corresponding with one of these dashes or chords on your tune. So now I'm going to play the tune and you try and play along with me, okay? I'll play, I can't fit in a triad, but I'll play a bass note, okay? And we'll do it on all of those ones. So 1 and 2 and that, again, it might take a little bit of practice to be able to play along with that, but that's all that's happening. Let's do it again, one more time. Okay, so, and you can, you know, if jumping between the chords is too much, just do a single note, do a bass note. So go G to G to G to C, D, something like that, you know, if that's easier for you. Okay, so 1 and 2 and good. Now, the great thing about this progression, as I said before, is that it fits with lots and lots and lots of tunes. So we're going to try the same progression, but now I'm going to play a jig against it. So the jig I'm going to play is Willie Coleman's. Okay, so now that's our main beats and clicking, and you're going to do exactly the same. Okay, so 1 and 2 and exactly the same chord sequence, working just with a totally different tune. Now let's mix it up. We'll go back to real time again, same chord progression. This time the real we're going to do is okay, really common tune, Mitch McLeod Ratty, and again that's your beat. Okay, so try playing along with that. 1 and 2 and. Good, I'll do it again, this time I'll play. Ready, and yeah, so there we can see that the very last bar doesn't work quite so well. It just somehow doesn't fit. So then all we need to do is tweak what we've got. Everything up to that point was working quite pretty well. If we go from the second line, this C worked well, and the chord 5 also worked well. It just didn't want to go back to the 1. So this time we're just going to leave out that last one and play so exactly the same chord sequence, just leave out that very last one, stay on the 5 chord. Okay, so ready? 1 and 2 and. exactly the same chord progression will work for the B part of that tune as well. So I'll play the B part now, you play with that. Ready? 1 and 2 and... Yeah, so straight away, you know, maybe a B part that you'd never heard before, straight away you can fit a bunch of chords with it. And so really this template becomes very useful because it allows us, by having a kind of basic framework that works, then all we have to do is tweak it for each tune. So as I said, about, you know, a huge number of the tunes that you hear that are in Ionian mode will work with this framework. Sometimes you just might need to tweak it slightly. So if I think about, let's think of another tune that's not going to fit with it. Yeah, so listen to Gunjig. So the tune for this is going... Okay, so if I play what's written, what we have for the other one, it'll be like this. Now, most of that sounds fantastic. It's exactly right. The only one that I think sounds a wee bit weird would be here. Here. It feels like it wants to go to another chord there. And the simplest thing to do then is look at your next chord that you're going to play and just shift it a little bit earlier and try that first. So our next chord would be a 4. So we're going to try bringing that forward and putting it into that third bar. Okay, so now it'll sound like this. Perfectly. So all we've done is have to like shift the position of one of those chords a little bit more. So all you're doing the more and more you do this, the better you will become at it. So what I would recommend doing is finding a bunch of tunes that maybe that you're familiar with, or it doesn't have to be. Again, I can send you a list of common tunes in Ionian mode. And do that, write out your basic framework. So starting from kind of those fundamentals that we put in. So put in your chord 1 onto the first and last beats, put in your chord 5 at those end points, try putting in the 4s and then play it. And then start to see, like, just be really kind of critical as you listen, like, does that fit? Or does that sound kind of, not quite right? And then moving them around. But basically with those 3 chords and in some combination, you will always be able to play along with what's going on. And so then it's just a little bit of kind of trial and error to get exactly the right method. But the more comfortable you become with moving between those chords 1, 4, and 5, the easier that will become. Okay, so what I want you to do now is do exactly the same thing. We're going to play this exact progression, but now we're going to go into a different key. Okay, so now let's go into D major. And we're going to play, so you're playing exactly the same thing, but now your chords 1, 4, and 5 have moved, and they're all relative to D. Okay, I'm going to just play that bit of scary tune again, but in the key of D major. So 1 and 2 and... sorry. But yeah, so exactly the same principle. And again, because we've used the numbers rather than the letters, if I'd written out GCD before and then got you to transpose it, it'd be an awful lot harder for you to just switch like that in your head. So by using the numbers, it really helps with that. Donna is asking a good question. So often the chords are written in over the notes using this method. Are they ignored? So this is where you have to be a little bit cautious. So for instance, if we look back at that session tune book, let me just share this. This session tune book here, for instance, that's a good example of one where the chords are written in. So you could, like, say if we were playing Morrison's Jig, you could just play it like this and not worry about the chord numbers and just play with what's written. But you have to be really wary with this because, first what the chords that somebody else might have chosen might not be the nicest ones. And so then that's kind of, what you're trying to do here is tune your ear, okay? If you just only play other people's chords, then you're not going to tune your ear to get used to hearing the right chords, okay? So the more you do it yourself and don't follow along a chord, by all means you can use a chord sheet to check, but I would try and do it yourself. But the other thing that can be a little bit problematic is that this is a place where there's actually a couple of examples I found of this today where what's written is not reflecting what's actually going on. So for instance here, this is this Morrison's Jig that we were talking about before. And do you remember I said that in the tune, we have this C sharp? Yeah. So that meant that the mode it was in was the mode that had the two sharps in it, which was, if we go back to this, the mode, so our keynote is E, and we're in the mode with two sharps, so this one, so we're in the Dorian mode. But what you can see here is that they have, the way they've written it, I'm not bad mouthing the Heart Festival here, but they don't worry, but like this happens a lot, and so this is why it's important to be really perceptive with what's going on. They've written it with just one sharp in the key signature, and they've said set C sharp above middle C. Now that's fine, you're going to get the correct result when you play it, but it doesn't give you that understanding of the mode that we're in, because by this key signature and starting on the note of E, we should be in Aeolian mode, but we're not, we're in Dorian mode. So be really cautious of using other people's resources. The other one that I found today, which was kind of making me laugh because it was recommended in somebody else's video, and I'm just going to tell you it just to be like, just to have your warning and your guard up. Let me find it again. It was one of these books of like 100 session tunes. I'm trying to find it. Yeah, this one. So somebody had recommended, it's another harpist had recommended this book on, she has a YouTube video about playing in a session. And I was like, oh great, this is a really good resource, let's go and look at that. But again, it's actually really problematic because it tells you at the start of each tune, sorry, scroll down. Yeah, it's always telling you like the key that you're in, and it does say, for instance, A Dorian or whatever it might be. But the problem with this is that it's not accurate. In a lot of them, when I went through it, it's not correct whether they're in Aeolian or Dorian. So again, and some of the chords that they've written in are just odd. So again, just be careful with other people's, There's a good example, for instance, here. They've said it's E minor Aeolian. Now, for a start, that doesn't make sense. There's no such thing as a minor and Aeolian. Like it's not a harmonic minor. It's what they should just say is E Aeolian. But then we know from our chart before that E Aeolian would only have wouldn't have that as the key signature. What they're showing us, this key signature is for E Dorian. So again, just be careful with the resources that you look at and make sure that you're always just double check everything that's said, because a lot of people don't understand these modes properly and they use these words without understanding what it means. So if you then start trusting that, first of all, it might lead to it's going to confuse you about what these modes actually sound like. If you're playing a tune if you're playing a whole bunch of tunes that it says is in Aeolian, but actually they're in Dorian, you're not going to train your ear to correctly recognize them. So I would just be kind of a little bit cautious about that. Good. Okay, so that is our Ionian mode. Now, the other thing that you can do, just to kind of progress a little bit on from this, is that there's some chord substitutions that we can use. So when we have our chords written out, if I write them out like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. Okay, if our chords are written out in a row like this, we have this thing that's called chord substitution, which is basically that any chord can be substituted for a chord that is 2 above it or 2 below it. Okay, so in the case of chord 1, that means that we could substitute it for a chord 3 or for a chord 6, okay, because that's the one. Chord 3 is 2 above, chord 6 is 2 below, okay. Similarly, if we had chord 4, we could substitute chord 4 for chord 2 or for chord 6 also. So they start to become kind of interrelated to each other. And all that lets you do by knowing that this 7 in Ionian, you don't really ever want to use this 7 because it's going to sound weird. So just ignore that one. But particularly chord 5 isn't that useful to substitute, but chord 1 and 4 are really nice for having lots of color to them. So if, for instance, we went back to our little chords chart from before, this one here, then what we can now start doing is substituting some of these just to add a little bit more interest. So for instance, we know that we've got all these 3 chord, we never want to substitute the first or last chord, okay? But here we know we've got 3 chord 1s in a row. So it might be more interesting to switch one of them out. So let's switch out this 1. Now we know that chord 1 could substitute for chord 3 or chord 6. So let's just try either of them. Let's do 3 first, okay? So now instead of playing 1, 1, 1, 4, 5, we're going to play 1, 1, 3, 4, 5, and it should fit, okay? So let's go back to G major. If you're not already in it, we're going to use our Spritisceri tune again. And this is how it would sound. I'll play that first line without the substitution. So if it was just the G's, it would be. Okay, so that sounds good. But then this time we're going to substitute that third 1 chord for a 3 instead. So it'll sound now like this. Didn't sound great there. Let's do it again. Okay, so might like it. Let's try substituting it in the second line for that one instead. Let's try that. That would sound like this. Now, to my ear, that one sounds a lot better than the one in the first line. So I would just say, okay, that's where I'm going to substitute that one. So now that one instead would become a 3. Let's score out that one. So let's try playing that second line. 1, 3, 4, 5, 1. Ready? 1 and 2 and chord 1, then chord 3, chord 4, 5, 1. Yeah. And since in that first line, the 3 didn't sound great, even it sounded okay, like it fitted, but it wasn't great. Let's try substituting for the 6 instead. That's the other one. So now we're going to go 1, 1, 6, 4, 5. Okay, so ready? 1 and 2 and. Okay, so to my ear, that sounds a lot better than the 3 did. So now, we'll score out that 3, and now let's make that a 6. So now our progression is going to be 1, 1, 6, 4, 5, 1, 3, 4, 5, 1. Okay, so let's try that. Ready? 1 and 2 and. So chord 6 here, then 4, 5, back to 1, then 3, 4, 5, and 1. So now, very easily, we've gone from something that was very simple but still sounded good to something that's just a little bit more fancy sounding but still sounds good and everything fits. So those chord substitutions, just remember, not ever the first or last chord, but anything else, you can go up or down 2 chords. And then it's a little bit of trial and error. Some ones might sound better than others. So you just need to kind of experiment with that a little bit. But again, the more you do it and get used to it, the better that will start to sound, okay? So I think we should take a break there because that's been loads of information. Let's take 10 minutes. Sheila, I have seen your answer about the left-hand chords, and we'll talk much more about left-hand rhythms and shapes in the second part once we've gone through all these modes, okay? So yeah, let's meet, it's 4:35 now, let's meet back at 4:45, okay? And again, if you've got questions, just pop them in the chat. But yeah, grab a drink and have a stretch and let your brain reset. So let's get going again. So we've spoken now about the Ionian mode and the fact that the main chords for that can be 1, 4, 5, and then you have the options of your substitutions. Now, one of the reasons that it's really important to identify our modes and why it really helps us is because the different modes have different chords that we commonly use for them, okay? So when we're in the Mixolydian mode, the other major sounding or happy sounding mode was, if you remember, the Mixolydian one. So that's the one with this flattened 7th in it. And Mixolydian tunes crop up quite a lot in Celtic music. So it's basically, they are similar to the major sounding scale, but they've got this one difference, this flat 7th in them. So sorry, I've been in this key. That was my key. So that's flat 7th degree and that one. So that it sounds really Scottish, or a lot of like bagpipe music is written in the Mixolydian key, which is why it's very common. So for instance, this tune. There's a slip jig there. So if it was just in a major, this is D Mixolydian. If it was D major or D Ionian, it would sound like this. But we have this flat 7th. Okay, so when we're trying to, that's kind of the thing that really makes it stand out. And because of that, it's a key that sounds happy, but it's got this little bit of darkness to it from this flat seventh. So it's less, if we're kind of going in the range of happiness, Ionian would be the most happy, and then Mixolydian is sort of one step down from it. So it's got this just little hint of darkness in it, and it gives a slightly more serious mood to the music, I guess. So I also think it's amazing that just by altering one note in a scale, you get such a different feel, but that's what's going on with the Mixolydian. So, yeah, I think it sounds, to me, it sounds very Scottish as soon as you hear it, or very, very Celtic, I guess. So, to help us identify tunes like this, again, it kind of depends how you're doing it. If you're listening just by ear and you don't have it written out, then probably tunes that are in Mixolydian will use a lot of that flat seventh in the tune. So like it comes up again and again in a part. So that's kind of the first clue that it's gonna that you're getting that slightly odd note, and it's coming on the main beats of the bar. So that's going to clue you in to the fact that it's Mixolydian, okay? And yeah, generally it will be a bold sounding tune, like quite a confident sounding tune, but it's got these flattened sevenths on it in it a lot of the time. So tunes that are kind of common in Mixolydian key include that one that's called Donald Willie and His Dog. Then tunes like She Moved Through the Fair. I'm not in the right key. So again, you would know that the keynote there was D, but it was always having that natural C in it. So that's kind of this giveaway that we're in Mixolydian mode. So again, I'll kind of give you a list of Mixolydian tunes so that you can practice that. But the reason that it's really important to distinguish Mixolydian from Ionian is, well, first of all, because you're going to have different levers on for them. So D Ionian would have the C sharp on, but D Mixolydian would have the C sharp off. So that's the first very important reason to identify them. And the second is that our common chords used are different. So while in Ionian, the common chords were, actually, quiz, write it in the chat. What were the common chords in Ionian? Yeah, 1, 4, and 5. Perfect. Good. When we're in Mixolydian, our common chords become 1 again, and then 7 and 5. Okay. So remember I said that in Ionian we never use the 7, but in Mixolydian we use the 7 all the time because it's the flattened seventh. So it has quite a different function. So 1, 7, and 5 will be the chords that we use. And generally the 7 and the 5 become quite interchangeable. Because do you remember when we were saying before with the chord substitutions, you always substitute for a chord that's like 2 up or down. So chord 7 is 2 away from chord 5. So that means that a lot of the time you could choose between a 5 or a 7. It's probably going to work with either of them. So chord 1 is major. Chord 7, so chord 1 is major. Chord 7 is also major. But chord 5 is minor. So if you want a more minor feel, then you'd probably use chords 1 and 5. If you wanted a more major feel, then you'd probably use chords 1 and 7. So just to kind of show you that, again, if I, on that tune that we had, that's just going between chords 1 and 7. But if I tried going between chords 1 and 5, okay, so that also fits. So then you can kind of try mixing them up. So sometimes you could do sometimes you could do 7, and sometimes you could do 5, for instance. So 7, 5, 1, 7, 1, 5, 1. Something like that. So they just become very interchangeable. And Laurie, you're taking notes for all of these. Yes, everything is in the handout. Everything I'm saying is in the handout, so don't worry. And between the two, you'll have it all. So 1, 5, and 7. And again, a lot of the key thing is just getting a simple framework. Like before, as a standard format, very often it will start on chord 1. The start of the second line will be chord 1, and the final chord will be chord 1. And then a lot of the time, these is just alternating between this 1, 7, 1, 7, 1, 7, or 1, 5, 1, 5. Most of the tunes that you're doing, that's kind of, you're going to get that change. But to identify that, I think this is easier in some ways than identifying the chord change in the Ionian, because it really feels like the tune goes down there. Like if I just play it. It's like, it's very light, not so light, back to light. Okay, so it's kind of, when it's on the lighter, happier sound, it's going to be a chord 1. And when it's on that sort of, it's gone down, it's one of those other two. So like another good example would be the tune Paddy's Green Shamrock Shore. Let me just find that. I'm going to show you it. This is like a very common, sort of one of those real classic Irish songs. Yeah, here is a good. Let me just show you that. Share screen. Okay, so yeah, this is what we're looking at here, this one. So if I just played it, now again, we know it's in a Mixolydian key because our keynote, starting, ending again, is D, but the key signature doesn't match up with D major. So the one that's one less is our Mixolydian, so that's how we know it's D Mixolydian. So this tune is going to go. So if I was playing that with the chords, that'd be 1, 1 again. And then here, hopefully you can hear it's changing to 7, back to 1. Okay, so let's try that again. Also, instead of that 7, we could do the 5. So let's try that. So the 5 is chord A. Ready? And. So that just gives us a little bit of a more sad feel to it. But this is a good tune to show you, because remember there was a question earlier about what happens if it changes modes. halfway through. So this one does. In the second part of the tune, it goes to G Ionian. But because these modes are related, they have the same key signature. So you're not having to worry about changing key there. Okay, by that Mixolydian part, just chords 1 and 7 or 1 and 5. Okay, so that just means that when you're identifying your tunes, hopefully that's, you know, if someone's in a session and a tune comes on that's a Mixolydian tune, you know that there's only going to be 3 chords that you have to figure out between. You know that probably your starts and ends of the phrases are going to be chord 1. So then it's just listening out for when you hear that descending, that'll be the 7 chord, and then back to your happier sounding 1. Okay, so in some ways I think the Mixolydian is one of the sort of more straightforward sounding ones. Now, you will all know this Mixolydian tune, so this is a good example just if you're trying to remember that. So if you put yourself into set your levers as if you were in G major, but we're actually in D Dorian. Sorry, D Mixolydian. So a very common tune to try and remember this one is What Should We Do with the Drunken Sailor? Okay, so it starts on chord 1. And then down to. Okay, so just between chords 1 and 5 again. Let me put that on the screen for you so you can try playing along with it. Where's my notes gone? Sorry. Here we go. So we've got. Oh no! Sorry, I'm talking absolute nonsense. This is for a different section. This is not a Mixolydian tune. Ignore me. Ignore the last 2 minutes. That's not. But if it was like this, it would, but it's not because the tune is adding. It's got a minor in it. Ignore. Rewind. Sorry. Okay, mixed up in my notes. Okay, so Mixolydian. I will give you again a list of tunes, but 1, 7, 5. But the key thing is it's major sounding. Okay, so that's figuring out the keys for that. So now we will go on to the minor keys. And remember at the start we said that the Dorian mode is the most common form of the minor keys. Okay, so this is the one where you've gone from your key signature. So if our key note was D here, D would normally, if it was the Ionian form, it would have 2 sharps in the key signature. If it was the Mixolydian form of D as your key note, it would have 1 sharp in the key signature. But now we're onto the Dorian form, so now we're down to no sharps in the key signature. So it looks like you're in C major, but we're actually in D Dorian because D is the key note. So this is the most common form of minor in Celtic music. So good examples of this one are, as I was saying, Drunken Sailor. Okay, that's a very common one. Or things like, that was again our Morrison's Jig. That was a. Sleep Sound in the Morning. So any of these tunes that sound like they're kind of minor-y, the chances are the first one I would try would be this D Dorian feel. And it's a funny key because it's minor in the sense that it is sad sounding, but it's more optimistic sounding than our Aeolian mode, okay, as we said before. So that's kind of the character of it. So although it is minor, it doesn't sound like really forlorn. It's, you know, it's got a bit more pep to it than that. So again, this one, there's only really going to be, again, 3 chords that you're going to want to use most of the time. So it's going to be chord 1, chord 4, and chord 7. Sometimes you might use chord 5. So 1, 4, 7, and 1, 4, 5, 7. So again, you're going to have the kind of common things that on, probably you're going to get chord 1 on all of your main beats. And then you're going to go somewhere else. So if we look at, let me, now I'll open it up with what we'll do is Drunken Sailor on the screen. So we're in D Dorian here. So we're starting on chord 1. Okay, now we can hear in the melody that there is changing. It's not going to fit with chord 1 anymore. So we've got a couple of options. We can try 7, we can try 4, and we can try 5. So if I do to 7 would sound like this. And that tends to be the most common. So again, between 1 and 7 is the most common in this. We can try the others. So let's try with 4. So doesn't sound great. And then again, we can try chord 5. That one's kind of okay, but 7 is definitely our best one. So 7, back to 1, 7, 1. Now that 7 there, I think that would be better as a 5. So again, this thing about other people's chords, that I just took this from somebody else, but that C in line 2, personally I would change to a chord 5 rather than a chord 7. Again, remembering about this interchangeability of those two. So then I would have, so chord 1, 7, 1, 5, 1. And it works for the second part as well. Dorian tunes, is that very often the chord progression for the A part and the B part is very likely to be the same. They tend to kind of stay on the same sort of feeling. So if we go into, we're going to do the same thing, but let's go into A Dorian. So if we were in A Dorian, let's work back again. What levers would we need? So if we were in A major, we would have 3 sharps. If we were in A Mixolydian, then we take one away, we would have 2 sharps. So then if we're in A Dorian, that's the next one, so now take another sharp away, we just have 1 sharp now. So your key is going to look like you're in G major, but actually you're 1 step higher in A Dorian, okay? So a common tune here, which I'm sure many of you will know, is the tune, let me stop showing this so it stops being confusing. The tune, the Gaelic song Hammy Ski, also known as Cutting Bracken. Okay, so let's go through the motions with this one. Let's say that was our tune that we've been played. So we've worked out it was in A Dorian. Again, in that first part, we've got 8 bars. So we're going to put in our 8 bar lines, and we're going to put in space for our little chords. Okay, so using the rules that we've done before, we'll put a chord 1 on the first beat. We'll put a chord 1 on the last beat. And we'll put a chord 1 on the first beat of line 2, okay? And in Dorian mode, very often, very often the fourth bar will be chord 5. That's like a pretty safe rule. So you can put in a chord 5 there. And again, very often at the end, we have this 5, 1. So that's now, it's not quite so close. It's in this bar here. Okay, so 1 space, space 5, then 1 space 5, 1. Okay, so we're in the key of A Dorian here. So that's going to be an A chord and an E chord. So let's try just playing that along with the so our beat is 1 and 2, 1. So ready? And A. Then 5. Back to 1. Then 5. And 1. Okay, let's try that again. Ready and. Works with just those 2 chords. You might want to, in that second bar, when you go to this one, that is a little bit clashy, so you might want to try one of those other ones, either chord 7 or 4 in there, or even chord 5. That one actually is probably the best, so just try the 3. So this is it with chord 1 and then 7. That's also fine. Or back to 5, or if we do chord 4, that one doesn't sound good. So we could choose between 5 or 7. They both sound decent. So let's do the 7 in there. Let's go 1, 7, 1, 5. So 1, 7. Now drop this. 1, 7, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1. Okay, so let's try that whole thing through. 1 and 2 and. Oh, we could do the 7 here as well. The other thing we could try doing is changing any of the other ones. We could try doing. That one doesn't sound great, but that one might sound okay. Okay, so that was going to chord 3 because that was a substitution for chord 1. If you remember, it's just up 2 chords. So that could work. So 1, 7, 3, then 5. Let's do 5 here. 5 again. And 1. Okay, so it's just like filling in the blanks. It's like you've got a jigsaw puzzle, and you know what it's like. You know, like on a jigsaw, you'd always do the edge pieces first, and then you fill in the middle. And it's just like that. You do the edges first, like the first chords, which are going to be your chord 1. Then you fill in the ones that are probably going to be your chord 5. And then it's just a little bit of trial and error of filling in the gaps. And the more you do it, the better you will become at it. And so there's lots and lots of these Dorian tunes, sorry. So things like The Rights of Man, or the, Sluicing in the Morning, Coolies, Morrison's Jig, Drowsy Maggie, Swallowtail Jig, Scarborough Fair, that's a good one. For instance, just using those chords, 1, 5, and 7. So again, I'll give you a list of these ones, and you can experiment with trying to find out what the chords are. Okay, so that's our Dorian mode. Yeah, Gina, it's nice to have a framework to work with versus just what sounds good. Exactly. And there always is going to be a little bit of just what sounds like. You do have, you're musicians, you do have to use your ear, and it will require some critical thinking. It's never going to just slot in exactly, but by having a framework, it gives you an awful lot more to start with. And also by knowing, if you know which mode you're in, then you know which the 3 most likely chords are going to be. And it's an awful lot easier to do it from 3 chords and figure out than from 7 chords. So it's kind of, you're just whittling down the options all the time. So then we're just on to the very last mode, and then we'll get into kind of more rhythmic stuff. So for the Aeolian mode, this is the one where you've now gone right down. So if you think about our diagonal again, if say, if you had A major, started with 3 sharps, A Mixolydian went to 2 sharps, A Dorian went to 1 sharp, now A Aeolian is down to no sharps. Okay, so you've gone down all 4, if that's the kind of easy way to think about it. So this is also known as the natural minor key. So if you put your harp into C major, A Aeolian, it will sound like this. So tunes that would be an Aeolian, they're ones that tend to sound a little bit more, again, they're a little bit darker than the other ones were. So for instance, the Ale is Dear is one, or the Rights of Man. It's that natural F in there that makes it different. That one. So that's what makes that different from the. If it had been Dorian, that tune would sound like this. Which sounds obviously totally different. So that's. By having that one nice sharp, that's what's going on here. And again, the main chords that we use in Aeolian are also 1, 4, 7, and sometimes 5. So actually we're using the same chords as in the Dorian, it's just the different, because we're starting from a different root, it has a different feel to it, okay? And then exactly the same way as we did before, we would start off with our framework. So let's actually, out of interest, let's take that one out. No, that's my Mixolydian one. Where did my too many sheets of paper? Okay, let's just start again. Okay, so we know. Let's say we'll do it for the Rights of Man. Okay, so again, 8-bar framework. Okay, so we're going to put in chord 1. In bar 1, in bar 5, and at the end of bar 8, okay? And we'll try putting in chord 5 on bar 4 and on bar 7. So we're starting off with exactly the same framework actually as we had for the Dorian tune. Okay, so 1 blank blank 5, 1 blank 5 1. So then again, we would just start with that and see how that sounds. So start our beats 1, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. that's definitely not the most exciting chord structure in the world for that tune. It's not going to set the world alight, but if you go to a session and you play that, nobody's going to bat an eyelid. Like, nobody's going to be like, oh God, those chords are wrong, because they all fit. So again, then what we would just do is we would just work on tweaking it a little bit and adding in, like, kind of shifting things slightly and adding things around. So we know that the other chords that might work in there are likely to be the 4 and the 7. So we can just kind of experiment. So I quite like the 1 again. But when we got to here, it was quite a lot of A, so maybe we try the 4 there. So we've gone 1, 1, 1, then 4, and then again 4, and then to 5, then back to our 1, 1. Let's try going 4, 5, 1. So all I did that was different there is if I write it into my 1. I just shifted this 5 along a little bit. So I still had 1, 1. Then I've put in the chord 4 here, just for a bit of color. And then 1, 1. And then this 5 here, I've just made come a little bit later, and it goes from the 4 to the 5, 1. Okay, so 1, 1, 4, 5. 1, 1, 4, 5, 1. Okay, so I'll play that one more time. Like this. Now our 4 chord. Then to 4, 5, 1. Okay, and again you could experiment with the 7, see if that fits anywhere. Doesn't sound great there. But it does work there where the 5 is. Remember we talked about the interchangeability of the 5 and 7. So it works there as well. It just gives it a different feel. It's more major. Remember we said that 7 is major and the 5 is minor. So if I just do it with the 1 and 7. Rather than, okay, one sounds more minor, one sounds more major, but both work, both are correct. Neither is going to get you frowned at in a session, most importantly, okay? So, Aeolian, again, I'll give you a list of tunes that are in that mode, but you're just thinking about those 4 chords again. So 1, 4, 7, and 5. So that's quite good to remember. So both of your minor modes are using the same 4 chords, okay? Mostly 1, 4, 5, 7. And our major ones, Ionian, 1, 4, 5, and Mixolydian, mostly 1, 7, and 5, okay? So that in itself, all of the modes except for Ionian use the 7 quite a lot, okay? So just stick away from it in that one. So that is our fundamentals of chords and choosing your chords. And it will just take practice. What I would recommend now that you do is, again, when I send you links, I'll send you links to lots of kind of playing of session tunes. And I would just go through this process, like listen, identify the keynote, then try and identify, is it major or minor? Okay, out of those two, which mode is it? Is it the one that's kind of, if it's the major, is it the one that's totally major, or is it the one with the flat 7? If it's minor, does it have that extra sharp in it or not? Which of those two is it in the melody? And then start making frameworks for yourself. So a lot of this work, I think one of the reasons people find sessions really hard is because they jump in without ever having done any of this work before, whereas actually you can really train yourself to do it before you get into the scary situation of a session in front of other people. But you can practice a lot of this on your own so that you're really used to finding these chords and really used to finding the keys in a way that's much more comfortable. So those are, that's kind of the most important. We now, like, remember back at the start, we had the three things. We had key, we had chord structure, and then we had rhythm and what type of tune it is. So now, finally, for the last little bit, we'll speak about the rhythms and the types of shapes that you want to get comfortable with using. Because again, what you really want is you want to have like what I would call like a toolbox of little cookie cutter shapes that work for each time signature, that you know that work, and that are they're at your level, and they work, they're easy for you to get your hands around quickly. Like the one thing that hopefully you're realizing in all of this is that the tunes move quite fast. So you have to be really comfortable moving between these chord shapes and between these chord numbers. And then we also want to have a whole bunch of little cookie cutter shapes that we know work, that then you just have to transfer onto your harp, whichever key you're in, and you're just sort of staying with these little shapes or rhythms. So you really don't want to have to you don't have time to think about it too much, especially if you're also in the moment having to figure out which chord is going on. So that might mean I'm aware that there's kind of a variety of different levels in this group. So that might be starting with something very easy. Like the first time I went to a session, probably I only played bass notes, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like that, that's absolutely fine. If you went to a session and they played Rights of Man and you just went dum ba 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 dum, that's fine. If you are on the beat and you're on the right chord, you are adding a lot to the session. You're adding a heck of a lot more than if you start trying to fiddle around with chords, and because you're not confident about moving between them, your rhythm goes all over the place. Like, nah, you don't want to get into that situation. Choose like something that's very simple for you at the start that just is locking into the chords. But then you can start obviously getting more fancy, and there's lots of options. So from a single note, you can progress up to an octave, obviously, but again, just with left hand. And then from there, you could do fifths. So for instance, if you just played those fifths, they've got such a strong character to them that 1/5 on each strong downbeat of the bar is going to add a huge amount. And so even if that's all you play, if you want to make yourself look more fancy because it's around people, do it in both hands, double it up. So dum ba 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 dum. So straight away you look like you're way more fancy because you're using both hands, but it's still very simple, and crucially, it's still the right chords on the right beats, okay? So that's kind of, I can't stress that enough. Don't feel that you have to do anything fancy. This is about rhythm and providing a strong rhythm and a strong chord structure for the players, okay? And that's the same whether you're playing for singers or instrumentalists. But obviously, it's important to be able to do the different patterns. So I think we'll go back to the Ionian key, or Ionian mode, because I'm a little bit happier sounding. So let's put ourselves into G Ionian, G major. First page of tunes. So the next thing to understand is about the time signatures that all our tunes are in, because this is kind of the next, if somebody's playing in jig time and you're playing along in real time, it's not going to work. And they're going to get annoyed with you. You don't want somebody that's going against the rhythm of what's being played. So it's really important that we start to understand these. And, I'm sure you all know this, but I cannot reiterate it enough, what types of tunes we're used to and where the strong beats are. So the most common types of tunes probably are reels. Now, reels are often written in 4/4 time signature. Okay, now that's not wrong, but really they're in 2/2. What that means is 2 minim beats per bar, or 2 half notes per bar. That's really the key signature that they're in. And that what that means is that when we're going along, it's because when we're playing a reel, if we're counting in 4, it's just very quick. Like if I was playing Super Scary. If we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, it's very quick, and it's not really where the main stress of it is. It's really going 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, so we're in that 2 beats per bar. So that's our reels, and it's all even. Okay, we're in what we call simple time, like it divides into 2. So our next most common type will be our jigs. Now jigs are in 6/8, but the crucial thing about jigs is, again, that beat subdivides into 2. Okay, so it subdivides into 2 dotted crotchets, or dotted quarter notes, depending on where you are in the world. It's not into that 6. It's kind of funny because you could subdivide that into 3 or into 2, but we're subdividing it into 2 groups of 3. So your jig is going to be 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, not 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. I don't even think I can. If I play a jig, the beats are 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So that's those dotted quavers. If I try to do it the other way, 1, 2, 3, 1. Oh, I can't even do it. I can't count the other way on it. But sometimes you hear it and it is wrong. So just think, if it's in jig time, you're going to have 2 major beats per bar. And if you're not used to recognizing these tunes, there's little kind of catchphrases that you can say along with what's going on. So with a jig, I mean, the simplest one is just to go jiggity, 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 jiggity. And if that fits, it's a jig. So jiggity, 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 jiggity. Or another one that people often use is rashers and sausages. Rashers and sausages, rashers and sausages, rashers and sausages, rashers and sausages. Something like that. So it's good to have like a little phrase that if when you're listening in the session, if you can say that along with the tune, it's probably a jig, and get used to, again, just practicing that. If it's a 4/4, it's going to be something much more square. I don't think what the one people use. Could be anything that's like a regular 4 beats. You could think of it, and that's how you recognize that. But yeah, that 6/8 is a really important one to recognize. Okay, so those are going to be our first 2. Oh, mummy, daddy, yeah, perfect. So if you can say mummy, daddy, mummy, daddy, mummy, daddy, mummy, daddy along to it, then you've got that square of 4 beats, as opposed to rashers and sausages, which is the 6. But the important thing in both of these times is that we're breaking into 2 main beats, but they're subdivided differently. Okay, so I then think it's really useful to just have a whole bunch of different patterns, essentially, that we can use on our harp that could work in anything. So, for instance, in this tune, we're going back to our very basic chord structure. There was 1, 1, 1, 4, 5, 1, 1, 4, 5, 1. Okay? So, simplest option would just be 1 octave on the first beat. So, dum, ba, da, dum, ba, da, 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 ba, da, dum, ba, da, da, dum, ba, da, ba, da, 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 da. Okay, that's simplest option. Next option is just to do a 5th on those main beats. So, dum, ba, da, da, ba, dum, ba, dum, ba, da, 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 dum, ba, da, da, ba, dum, ba, dum, ba, da, 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 da. Okay, then you could also do a 10th. So, for instance, that would be G and B. So so starting to sound a little bit more full, a little bit nicer. And then you're just building really on those bass lines. So by filling in, what you want to do is start filling in the off beat. So we're going to put something on that second beat. So your easiest option is just to like play an octave in the bass, for instance, and then in the right hand, find the notes as if it was filling out the triad. So the B and the D. Okay, so now you're going to have a problem when you get to here because these ones only get one count, so they don't have time for. So what I would do is, and anything that just gets one count, just play that together, like that. So now you've got together, and here you do have time for a separate 4, but you only have time for a 1 beat, 5 and 1. Okay, so let's try. I hope that makes sense. Let's try that nice and slowly. Okay, so this is coming on the main beat, that's on the off beat, and if you only have one space, then they come together. Okay, so 1 and 2 and. This is the one that's together and together. Good, let's do that same again, a little bit faster. 1 and 2 and. Again, remember that this chord sequence works for lots of tunes, so you can practice a rhythm and keep going around it. So that's one option. Now, if we want to kind of open that up a little bit more, for instance, instead of playing that as a chord, we can just keep to the same 2 notes, but open it up now. So we're going to go. Okay, so 2, 1, 2. So that's going to go. Each main beat now is getting a bass and top, top, top. Okay, so dum ba da dum ba da dum ba dum ba da 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 dum dum ba dum ba dum ba da ba da 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 dum dum ba da da dum ba da 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 ba da 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 da. That one, if I'm doing 2 in a row, I tend to use the octave the next time. So instead of going, I tend to go low, high, low, high, low, high, low, high, low, high, low, high. Okay, so that's all that's happening in that one. Then what you can do is you can start to open up this top hand. So for instance, at the moment we're doing the top 2 notes of the triad, but try now doing the B and the G like that. Okay, so it's the 3rd and the octave. So now it's like this. Exactly the same as we were doing before, but the gap is now just, instead of being a 3rd, it's now a 6th. And then the great thing about those two is you can start to interchange them. So when you've got two in a row, for instance, you go third, sixth. Okay, so straight away you're just building kind of layers of excitement. So you've gone from simple to opening it up, to then doing it as a sixth, to then alternating between the third and sixth. And you know, for some of you, you might need to just spend time just on that pattern really slow. And that's absolutely fine. Then it's on the sixth, and then alternating. And that's absolutely fine, you know, like there's no rush with any of this. I'll write out these patterns for you so you've got them and you can just practice them at the speed that's comfortable for you. But ideally what you want to start doing is moving between these chords, so the 1, the 4, the 5, comfortably in these different shapes, if that makes sense. Okay, so then what you can do with, this is all in the real rhythm still, and the other thing you can start doing is adding in some damping, because damping is hugely percussive. So you could go. For instance, I'm just damping on the offbeat. So that's really useful as well. Okay, and then all you're doing is if we're aware that we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 beats per bar. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We can start finding other 8-note shapes or 8-beat shapes. So for instance, 1 and 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 might be one that would work. So that's doing in the bass, G, D, G. And then in the right hand, A, B, D, G. Okay, it's a G chord with an added second. And we can just run it up that and then back to the second finger. Okay, so that gives us our 8 beats. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then, so let's just try looping that a few times. Don't worry about changing chords. So ready? And 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Let's take that shape and let's put it onto a C chord now. So we've got C, G, C, and then D, E, G, C. Ready? And 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Again. Okay, so that's the shape that we could use in this. Now again, we've got to remember that that's a shape, because it's 8 counts, it takes up the full bar. So when we've got the bars where there's 2 in the bar, we need to cut them short. We can only do 4 of the notes. So we could do 1. Now we're only going to get 4 here for them. And then back. Okay, so we only can do just choose 4 of the notes from that chord and then back to your G. Okay, so that whole thing now, if that was this tune, 1, 2, 3, we go dum ba ba dum dum ba dum ba dum ba da 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 dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba da 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 dum 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 ba dum ba da dum ba da 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 da. Okay, so just using that little framework, and you know you could go on eternally with these, just finding 8-note shapes. So you could do it as triads in each hand that's going to go up and over. there's so many different 8-note configurations that you could get. That's that's sort of infinitesimal, like there's no limit to what shapes you could have. But it's always important to have, I would say it's always good to have a strong bass note. So you always want your chord, your 1 to be strong, okay? So that's with reels, like anything that breaks down into 4 or 8 is great. But yeah, particularly I really like this one. That's one I would use an awful lot when I'm playing reels, because it's just really groovy, and it's very simple, but it's got a great groove to it. So the people you're playing with will love you for that. Like, it's just very strong and very feels very good. So then if we think about jig time, remember we said was 6/8, and that breaks into 2 strong beats. So 1 2 3 4 5 6, 1 2 3 4 5 6. So again, if we start with the basics, let's just put an octave on each of those strong notes. So dum ba dum ba da dum ba da dum ba da ba da dum ba da 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 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2 and a. You're just wanting to find something that goes on those strong beats of the bar, and then it just becomes exactly the same. We just start filling it out. So you could go from just bass notes to your fifths, and you could alternate them. So dum ba dum ba da dum ba da dum ba dum ba da dum ba da dum ba da dum ba da dum. Okay, so again, it might seem simple, but your session players are going to love you because it's strong, it's on the beat, and it's the right chord. Okay, so that's just alternating 1 2 3 4 5 6, 1 2 3 4 5 6. Okay, and then with like we broke the real rhythm into 8, with this rhythm we want to break it down into 6, so into our 6 quaver notes or 6/8 notes. So you want to find any shapes that are just 6 notes. So the simplest by far is just to use a triad in each hand. Okay, so that will fill up 1 bar. So that'd be da 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 ba da da ba da da ba 4 5 da ba da 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 4. Here you only have time for 1 of the hands. So when you move faster, you can only do 3 notes rather than 6, but that's still easy. So let's try that. So this series of triads, 1 and a 2 and a da ba 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 da ba da 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 start mixing that up. So for instance, you could have the top hand going upwards and the right hand going down. So you can go da ba da ba da da ba da something like that. Just something that adds a little bit of extra interest. Or you could find a slightly bigger shape. So now you could do it in the left hand. You could have a 4-2-1 shape, so G D G, and in the right hand, fill out the rest of that chord, so B D G. So now you've got da 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 ba da 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 ba da ba da da. Oh, sorry, da 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 ba da da ba. And chord 4. Da ba da da ba da 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 ba da da ba da ba da 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 da. Okay, so again, just a 6-note shape that's kind of will fit in with anything. So your reels are groups of 4 or 8, whatever you choose, and your jigs are groups of either 2 or 6, depending on what you choose. And then, I mean, you can break it down. You could do something like, instead of just going dum ba dum ba dum dum ba dum, you go like a page of lots of suggestions of all these different rhythms that you can do, and I would just suggest that you practice them around, write down a chord structure for yourself and just get used to doing each of these little shapes in turn, because ideally what you want to get to is at a point where you don't want to kind of stick with any one thing for too long. Ideally, for instance, if you were playing Willie Coleman's, maybe the first time round it went da 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 da. Start moving between the shapes rather than sticking with one shape the whole time. You have more flexibility to start moving between them, but that takes again, like that's not something that's going to happen overnight. You have to be confident with the shapes, and you have to be confident with moving between the chord changes to get to the point where you can have that freedom within it. But everything that we've talked about today will help you get to that stage if you just kind of practice it in isolation. And again, I can't stress this enough, like make it as simple as you can. Remember what we said at the very start about sessions is not about solo playing, and it's not about dazzling virtuosity. Like nobody cares how fancy your chords are, they just want to have a solid beat that keeps a really good groove. So it's way better that you're just going than that you're trying to do some sort of like, and it's just going all over the place, because nobody can keep a beat with that. Like, simple is better when it comes to session playing. So then we just sort of start to think about the other time signatures, and it's exactly the same thing. So a waltz, for instance, is in 3/4 time signature, and that's breaking up into 3 crotchet beats, or 3 quarter note beats. So again, you could just stick to doing, this is where like your 4-2-1 shapes are really great. If I played Margaret's Waltz, for instance, your left hand could literally just do so this is chord 1, 1, then 4, 5, 1, and 1, then 4, 5, 1. Okay, same pattern as we've been using a lot. So I'll play the tune and just do that bass. So 1, 2. Version with the waltz. And then if you wanted to break it up, again, it's 6 beats per bar, but now it's broken down slightly differently from our jig. So you could do, again, any of the patterns that worked for your jig will also work for this. It's just that the stresses are different. So we could start with the 2 triads. So dum ba dum. You could again go for the bigger chord, so 4-2-1 in the bass, and in the right hand, the top of that chord, the B D G. So something like dum ba dum ba dum bum ba dum ba dum dum ba dum ba dum da da da. Okay, again, it doesn't need to be fancy. It just needs to be those 3 regular beats. And again, you could come up with any shapes here. you could tell something kind of that one there where you've got a 4-2-1 in the bass, but instead of having the B D G, you make it A B D. So shape that works really well for waltzes. Or you could do like, you know, the really typical sort of cha 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 dum ba dum ba dum. There, I've just got the octave in the bass and 2 and 1 on B and D. So dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba da dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum. Okay, so something like that can work really well. Just again, can't stress enough, keep it simple, find a shape that you find easy and practice moving between the chords with that. It's so much better to find something that you are comfortable with playing. This is like, playing in a session is not the place to push your technique. There's lots of other places to do that, but in a session, that's not the aim. The aim is to consolidate your rhythm and find patterns that are really rhythmic and that underpin exactly what's going on. So I would just go through that with all the different types of tunes. So you've got your waltzes, other common things would be things like slip jigs. So slip jigs are in 9/8, and they break up into 3 dotted crotchets, like that. So that's tunes like your butterfly or anything that's that sort of, yeah. That's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, dum, ba, ba, da. And with those, I find this 5-note shape works really well for slip jigs. So doing a 4-2-1 in the bass, and in the right hand, G and a B. So it's going to go 1. Shape for slip jigs, for instance. And then your other most common types will be hornpipes. So like the Rites of Man. Now hornpipes are in 4/4. So if we went back to that one, so the difference between hornpipes and reels are the hornpipes are in this dotted rhythm. So if it was a reel, it would be, but because it's a hornpipe, we've got this dot. So I think in hornpipes, it's really useful just to stay on the main beat. So something like dum ba 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 dum. Or something that's equally dotted. So 1, remember we had for our reels, you could do the same but with a dot. So bum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba. Rhythms like that are great for hornpipe. And again, that was just alternating between that one that had the 3rd at the top and the one that had the 6th at the top, and kind of mixing those up. So those are really great rhythms for hornpipes. What else? Polkas, less common, but they're in a 2/4 time signature. And they tend to be useful just, again, just keeping it quite, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, not breaking them down very much. Like I would keep them quite chunky in what I'm doing. But again, I will write out kind of all of these different patterns for you so you can get some ideas for all those tune types. And I mean, that kind of covers everything. Like that same for your a lot of songs will be a kind of either 4/4 or 3/4, so you can just stick to exactly the same patterns that we've looked at. It's just about making sure that your strong beats are in the strong places, basically. And then I sound like a broken record now. Making sure that you're really comfortable with the chord changes. So, just choose one of the modes to start with. Say like, okay, for the next 2 weeks, I'm only gonna practice the Ionian mode, and I'm gonna get really comfortable with changing between chords 1, 4, and 5 in all the different keys. And I'm gonna really nail 3 different rhythms that I think will work well. And so sort of do that, and then move on to, okay, now I'm gonna do the same thing, the same rhythms, but now I'm going to do it in the Mixolydian mode. So I'm going to get really used to moving between that 1, 7, and 5 and do it that way. Rather than always break it down into manageable chunks, and don't try and go above whatever playing level you're at. Like if it's just a single note in your bass line, it's absolutely fine. It's so much better that you play a single bass note that's on the beat and that's the correct bass note than that you start flinging in all sorts of random chords, or worse, that you start noodling around, okay? So I feel like that's everything I kind of wanted to cover, but I'm aware that you probably have loads of questions potentially. So feel free now to stick things in the chat or to just unmute yourself and ask, and I will try and clarify anything that's not clear at this point. Maybe you're all just like stunned into silence. Like, oh God, so much to work on.
I had one question. It's easier to than try and typing. Do you know of any sites or any places where you can look for sessions? I live in Sussex, so there's not a lot. Well, obviously there's not a lot going on at all at the moment. But
yeah.
Is there anywhere where you can?
Yeah, there is. So there's actually a great website that's called thesession.org. Okay. And in there, it definitely has a list of like a place where you can kind of search for sessions near you. Again, it's probably quite out of date at the moment because so much will have stopped because of COVID. But the amazing thing, COVID has been like this, this awful curse, obviously, and so terrible. But one of the things I think has come out of it is that like this transitioning to being online for a lot of things means it's so much easier to learn certain things. So like, now if you type in slow session into YouTube or again, I'll give you a list of resources. There's so many places where you can kind of have that experience of like, as if you were, sometimes they're in real time, like it's just that everyone's on their Zoom, or sometimes it's a pre-recorded thing, but there's lots of ways that you can start practicing along to. And, if you're in England, hopefully the sessions will be back pretty soon. But yeah, it's I'll put all of that in the link.
Brilliant. And yeah, this class has been just mind blowing for me. I've
learned so much.
Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, let's see. Anything else? Yeah, Gina's making this point about so many people are just using this major and minor, which doesn't fit and isn't reflecting what's actually going on. So it's so useful to get that in your vocabulary. And also, I really find it's no surprise to me that people get confused between the modes because there are so many resources out there that mislabel things. So they either have the wrong key signature or they say it's Ionian when it's not or whatever. And so it's no wonder people get confused with it because it's really hard to like actually understand it. So yeah, it's just very useful to start understanding it and then looking at all the tunes you're doing and see like, if you see Morrison's jig written out with a just one sharp, think, no, that's wrong, like because it has a C sharp in the melody. It's not, I think people think of them as minor tunes that have accidentals in them, but that's not at all what they are. It's very different. They are a mode, and a mode is like a tangible thing. Good, what else? Let's see.
Is there a book of session tunes that gets it right that you would recommend?
Oh, I'll have a little hunt for you. I'll have a wee look and see if there is one that I can find that seems to be more accurate.
Especially one that's very basic with the real basic nuts and bolts of that
Yeah.
almost all sessions do.
Yeah, I'll let me have a look for you, and again,
That
I'll
would be awesome. Thank you so much.
It's interesting, even on like there's that website, thesession.org, and I was trying to look for like tunes to list in these different modes, and again, like it's such a load of rubbish for half of them. So yeah, I'll try and find one that is actually good and is accurate. And yeah, I mean, if as I say, if there's anything else, please just feel free to drop me an email at any point. You all have my contact, and I'll try and if there's anything that's kind of not clear in the handout, or as you go back to things that you're still like, what on earth is she talking about? Then we can absolutely talk about it. And maybe it's something that I don't know if there's a demand for it. Like, let me know. If there's demand for doing a slow session or something like that, once a month or whatever like that. That's absolutely something we could do, or just start putting down a couple of I could put down like a set of tunes a month or something like that for you to practice, just the melody for you to practice backing along to. Things like that can be useful. But yeah, have a think and see if there's. I'm just, I'm still stuck at home, so I'm just responding to whatever seems to be like the questions that people have, and if there's anything that I can do to demystify things, then I'm very happy.
I'd definitely be up for a slow session if that was ever set up.
Yeah, great. Okay, well that's good.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Interest and then it's the sort of thing where we can even if it was just like kind of half an hour every month or something like that, but where you knew what the tunes were going to be, and then you could have worked on them advanced and figured out the chords that you wanted to play, things like that. Would be good.
That's a great idea.
Great. Sheila, any technical books to help? I'll give you a plug. I'm just releasing my new technique book on the 9th of August. So that's got loads and loads of technical, I think it's like up to about 124 different technical exercises now, all specifically for Celtic harp. I was kind of getting really sick of using classical books because I think that there's so many techniques that are different for folk music, so that's really specific for that. And yes, it does have grace note technique in it. Yeah. Good. Okay, I think if that's all, if anyone does have something they don't want to ask in front of everyone, feel free to just stay on. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming. And yeah, as I say, I was really nervous about delivering this, so thank you so much for being so nice. So yeah, hopefully it'll be helpful. And yeah, I'll put together. It might be tomorrow that it takes normally a couple of hours to upload this, and I just want to like update all the sheets with kind of everything that I added in. But yeah, so maybe tomorrow I'll send everything out and find as many helpful links and things as I can. Okay, perfect. Good. Have a lovely rest of your evening.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Celie. That was so useful.
Oh, thanks, Elaine. Really glad you enjoyed it. Right, Olivia.